Some good news coming out of Albany tonight. Senator Gorin's leadership has once again passed the legislation, Section Senate 5122A of which is an amendment to the LIPA Act. This amendment will prohibit LIPA from recovering a cent of back taxes. He has passed this again for the second year in a row. Now it moves to the Assembly, and I think we all can be optimistic that hopefully also, Clerk Ray, his name is still a co-sponsor on that legislation, so I feel that it's very gonna. If we can pass it in the Assembly and the governor will sign it.
Mr. Marcantonio, who's the prime sponsor right now?
The prime sponsor is Assemblyman Stern.
Okay.
We are also trying to get Assemblyman Levine to really push forward on this. If we can get this legislation through the Assembly and the governor can sign it, what we'll have is the elimination of nearly $1 billion of back taxes, thereby strengthening the leverage that you have in any settlement negotiations that LIPA is trying to coerce us with. For the last few years, I've been arguing that we are not going to find justice in courts given the Northport versus LIPA lawsuit, where the same judge ruled so, in my opinion, egregiously against us. That instead, in order to win this suit, what we actually need to do is not go to courts, rely on the courts, but instead go up to Albany and amend the LIPA Act to restrict LIPA of its scope, broad scope, to sue us in a tax certiorari case. That's why I've implored this body to not settle, so to provide the State Senate and the Assembly the time and the room to pass prophylactic legislation that will prevent LIPA from doing what it's doing right now. However, recently I was apprised of a motion to dismiss, motion for summary judgment written by Larry Kelly that I'm here and imploring you to reconsider and to take a look at. This motion to dismiss, I think, is excellent. I think that the motion should be included in our litigation strategy. And while successive motions for summary judgment are not encouraged by courts, there is certainly precedent to include a subsequent motion for summary judgment in a form like this if a new and yet untested defense is present in that motion. So I believe that this is an excellent motion for the following reason. First, what is going on? It is, if this motion is included in our litigation strategy, it will provide the court with a basis for throwing the suit out completely on a technicality. The technicality being that under 1020B of the New York Public Authorities Act, LIPA, which is chartered under that act, meaning that it's enabling legislation, LIPA must comply with that act.
I'd like to give this man more time to hear his story.
Thank you. Under 1020B of the New York Public Authorities Act, LIPA must comply with what's called the Public Authorities Law. Under the Public Authorities Law, 1020Q says
we
very
can't extend the time, but Mr. Cook, if you have a question about something,
why can't we extend the time? I'm
because
confused
everyone
here.
is.
I'll make
This man is talking about something extremely important to us, and he should be able to be heard because he's done a lot of research in it.
I'm sure he has, but I mean the 5G people had
Right,
something
so
very
I'm gonna
important
ask you a question.
We could ask
I'm
questions.
going to ask you a question. How do you think we should go forward with this, Mr. Marcantonio? And please take as much time as you need.
Thank you, Councilman Cook. This motion must first be approved by this board. If it is,
the volume on that, please.
If it is, then what will happen is that our council will try to include this motion for summary judgment, which means for everyone a motion to get rid of the case. What will happen is if the court approves this motion, which there is precedent to do, even though it is a second motion for summary judgment, what will happen is the court will be provided with an argument that I think is very clear and very simple. Under the Public Authorities Act, there's something called the Public Authorities Control Board. They must, upon LIPA executing any contract over $1 million, and of course the Public Power Authority contracts that LIPA has with National Grid are, of course, in exceedance of $1 million. The Public Authorities Board must approve that contract, or else it cannot be ratified. LIPA did not do this. It did not present this contract or any of its contracts to the Public Authorities Board. And the reason it didn't is because under that statute, it requires that the Public Authorities Board review any contract that LIPA creates over $1 million to determine whether or not that contract will materially adversely affect overall real property taxes in the service area. The Public Authorities Control Board is empowered to review these and provide impact analyses so that the judges in these tax certiorari cases have actual information over what impact it will have. This is under the law. This is not a technicality. This is not permissive law. This is actually very much enforceable law. If LIPA does not act in accordance with its enabling act, which is the Public Authorities Act, what ends up happening is anything that LIPA does in accordance with its powers are actually invalid. So, for example, if LIPA executes a contract over $1 million and does not go to the Public Authorities Control Board, that contract is invalid. And so the power purchase agreements, which form the basis of National Grid's suit, which it assigned, as you know, to LIPA to litigate, that contract in and of itself is invalid under the New York Public Authorities Act. Finally, any modifications to those contracts are invalid. A modification being the key provision under the Public Authority Power Purchase Agreement of 2007 was LIPA must provide National Grid the consent, with its consent, in order to initiate these tax certiorari suits. That provision was modified in the 2012 agreement. And in the 2012 agreement, what language replaced that previous language was, National Grid shall diligently try to lower its taxes, in summary. So that is a modification certainly worth over $1 million as well. So the power purchase agreement is worth over $1 million. It was not reviewed by the Public Authorities Control Board. The modifications are worth over $1 million because the tax certiorari suit is worth far more than $1 million. Very straightforward motion here, very clear, very easily understandable. I think it should at a minimum be included in our litigation defense. I think it is worth a try. And more importantly, I was at the Nassau County Legislature 2 days ago, and I presented this exact case to them. The majority and minority counsels came up to me after, very interested in this defense, and I provided this motion to both of them. And I provided it to them on the grounds that they would modify this motion, because this motion applies to Huntington only, but it's a very slight tweak, and they might include this in their litigation should they vote down the settlement offer from LIPA. I think this is a very clear way what we can throw the litigation out on a technicality. The technicality is a very big one. Technicality seems to imply that it's not a very big thing, but it's extremely important. LIPA must follow the law. We know that LIPA is lawless. We know that LIPA doesn't follow the law. We know that LIPA lies to us. We know that LIPA is coercing this board right now to enter a settlement that is not fair and is inconsistent with the purpose of LIPA, which is to provide us energy and to provide us good services and to act in the public interest. And so, with all that background, I believe that it is very important that we diligently litigate this as much as we can. And I think this is a very good way to do it. I'm not saying that this is a silver bullet. I'm not saying that this will definitely work. But what I am saying is that this provides us with a very good basis.
I think you've answered Mr. Cook's question.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will be.
Thank you very much. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I will be providing this with the clerk.
And now that concludes our public portion. We're now going to go directly into our agenda. And we're starting off with Mr. Cook with number 51.
I offer Resolution 51 to authorize the supervisor to